worked so far in your life, and it's not going to work after. Okay, let's learn from our experiences. What we need is a different approach, and the different approach is our spiritual power within us, which controls everything around us. There's nothing more powerful. I have found through my exercises, the telementation, it can overcome anything, and it tells me that it's connected to this omnipresent field of light everywhere, working through us, and it's the ultimate power. So there you go.
So how did you convince this this person you're talking about that gave up after 5 minutes? He's one of these. Oh, okay. I think they weren't very interested in the first place. When you're in the university, a lot of students will say, "Oh, I really love your stuff. Let's do an independent research or independent study project next semester, and here on this project." And then they'll seem like a really motivated student, and then you'll get to it, and they don't want to do much work. The university is just not a good. It was not a good place for me to be. There's a lot of the kids are real young, which is not a negative, but when I was that age, I was still trying to figure out which way was up, really, when I was 19 years old. So, anyways. Okay, so it's, I guess I'm not clear. You're saying to connect to an inner essence that always is, and it's not really a feeling, but it is feeling.
Oh, okay. Yeah, now I see what excellent question again. Okay, the feeling mass is just a sort of gate or door or something to when I refer to spiritual ecstasy, I do, when I talk, blur the lines between deep feeling states and the spiritual ecstasy, because the two, it's kind of like how yesterday we talked about the ego really isn't the ego. The ego actually is just a piece of spiritual consciousness that we're misperceiving and distorting through our poor perception practices of looking outward all the time. Now, now going inside yourself, so forget the ego for a second. There are these different levels. There's the feeling, the deep feeling, which I call the feeling mass, which I specifically describe in the book, so it's not so vague as I put it here. And then there's the spiritual ecstasy at its core. I have a specific page in the book. I'll try to page through here, see if I can find it, which just has a diagram of this. And at that core, if you penetrate into the feeling mass as much as you can, there does come a situation where you've just transcended feeling. Okay, it's something. This is very Buddhistic, and it's just not something that can be described in any with language, because it simply transcends language, as all of the real reality does transcend language.
Would you relate it to Eckhart Tolle's explanations of being in the now moment, timelessness, connectedness with everything?
Yeah, I'm actually a pretty big, to sort of sound silly, a big fan of his. I like him quite a bit. I want to get him on my show sometime. I don't know if that would work. He's a big name these days. But yeah, I agree with basically everything he says in his book. Oh, what's that first book he wrote? The Power of Now. I think I just describe things more of in a step one, step two, clear way. The book Telementation is not a very Buddhistic book in the sense that most Buddhistic books are very poetic, and they don't really tell you, here's what you do at step one, here's what you do at step two, and they'll say things more like this: if you are using your language, you do not understand. If you are using your eyes to see, you are blind. If you are talking, you are not saying anything. That's the way, very Taoistic. Even if it's Indian Buddhism, which is before the Taoist tradition, really, the whole tradition sounds Taoistic in those senses, which is wonderful. I love this kind of, because this is getting at the truth, these sort of paradoxical, poetic statements. But, and Eckhart Tolle, he doesn't write specifically in that way. He's more of a how-to guy as well, very, very good at and such, writing in that way. But I think telementation is even more so, okay, let's just strip everything away and say, get to the mechanics of the whole situation. What do we need to do?
Okay, so in Zen, what they call satori is that moment. It's what I'm just reading from Eckhart
I pulled the book down here. It says,
Oh, okay.
a moment of presence, a brief stepping out of the voice in your head, the thought processes, and their reflection in the body as emotion. It is the arising of inner spaciousness, where before there was the clutter of thought and the turmoil of emotion. So I just wanted to put that out there. I guess it clarifies what you're saying. It's just the ego identification of everything. And so when we get into the meditative states, that's the using your fly swatter to swat all those thoughts or identities that come into the brain when you're trying to connect, right?
Yes. The interesting quote from Eckhart, I love that name too because it reminds me of Meister Eckhart, but yeah, I explain everything. See, he's talking in that passage from the other side, to put it. And when I say the other side, I'm speaking in the terms of ego language, ego consciousness, and I do that on purpose because because when you're on the other side, it doesn't really matter what you say. Language doesn't. It's almost like cockroach activity, languages, because it just isn't. It doesn't apply to that domain.
Yeah.
But what I do is I always try to, that's why I say spiritual ecstasy, for example, because that's what the ego, for someone coming into all these studies, the ego consciousness knows, oh, okay, it must mean some kind of sheer happiness and satisfaction or relation or even a high or something. And I want people to think about it, things from that. Because, if I wanted to describe things I wanted to, I would describe, I would say telementational, the core of telementational work, this inner nirvanic core that we have, is a light that is indistinguishable from myself, which has there's nothing to say, really. I don't know. I can't even. I was going to try to make some poetical terminology up, but I can't even think of anything off the top of my head. So my big deal is really to go against the Buddhist tradition and really explain things in the egotistical consciousness's language, and then hopefully they can use that to break out of the ego prison.
Well, it's good, actually, because people need that, quite frankly. We sometimes need, the steps laid out on how do we get there and explained more clearly. What does that mean? What is the releasing of everything and being in that moment of beautiful timelessness and interconnectedness? So, if someone who hasn't been there and you're describing it, what's the point? And why do they want to do that? But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of people want an escape. That was the main reason I dove so headfirst into Buddhism when I was, just after that time when I said I didn't know which direction was up. You were raised in this culture to be basically confused. It's not like an American Indian scenario before they were invaded, where you're specifically taught how the world works from the age of about 2, and you're given real information about how it works. No, we're raised in this culture to be confused, and I was just a huge example of that. And I suffered a time of pretty good depression just because I didn't want anything to do with this world. I didn't want to go be an engineer. I didn't want to go work at McDonald's. I didn't want to do any of it. I just wanted to go and be by myself and read and do meditation. Or actually, I didn't. But before that, I didn't even know about something like Buddhism. And what Buddhism offered was an escape from everything. And we don't need to label in terms of just Buddhism or something. This is Buddhism.
Spirituality is an escape for many. Actually, you can call it any religion, but some people withdraw from life and go right into that just to escape as well. So yeah.
Well, one thing that I saw quite clearly was like everybody, suddenly at some point I saw that everybody, whether it was religion or even, power trips or whatever, they would be like they're all looking for a mind-bending experience, kind of like that's where addictions come from, because they get like a false sense of something more out of the different things that you can be addicted to, but it's all a pale shadow compared to what we're really all looking for, which is that connection, like Avatar said in the chat room, to be able to jack into the universal mind like they did in the movie Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
That connection.
Yeah, I actually have not seen that movie. I'm excited to.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah, it's yeah, we don't need. Yeah, talking in terms of just Buddhism is almost a setback because this is just this movement within us to remember what we are, and that's what I'm all about. I mean, that's my big campaign in my life lately. Is just it's almost a metaphysical activism or something.
So
like that.
So what in your book talks about the thought process elevation, sorry.
Like the state of knowingness that I call it.
I guess I haven't read the book, but I get the gist of it from what I've seen on your site and everything. But obviously there's a process where you're talking about people are just drones and they're following what they're being taught and they're just identifying with those constantly in their life and expecting those things to happen, which causes it to happen. So what in the book, can you explain this process where they remove themselves from that and go into magnetizing purposefully?
Yeah, what I think of the human being as is just a reaction machine, and the average human spontaneously grows up to be someone who looks outside of themselves and is continually just reacting against the environment. That's why our psychology, Pavlov and his dog and all this kind of stuff, is so concerned about reaction behavior. And this is so set into us that we, not just in our universities, but everywhere, we're taught that that's what we are. We're just behavior response machines, and that's fine. And sure, go ahead and do that if you want to, but that's just the false self, what's doing that, and the real self just simply finds a different way to live. Now, the way you find that different way to live is not necessarily, well, let me say this quite earnestly. It's not a choice that you make. It is a choice to start doing telementation and meditation or whatever that's all a choice. But to live a totally different life is not really a choice. It's more of a product of a transformation that you undergo with spiritual practice. It's sort of related to the I forgot if it's the first or second Buddhist noble truth, where all life is suffering, dukkha, they call it. And now that so many Western, I remember when I was teaching Buddhism still in university and studying all this Buddhist literature and whatnot, that Western academic Buddhists or that would research it and write about it in their Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press and everything, they would always describe the First Noble Truth as a philosophy, as an idea, like a lesson to learn, like a little maxim, like they learned when they were in elementary school, memorizing their capitals of their 50 states. And that is absolutely not what that Noble Truth in Buddhism is. It's a realization. You see it when you're...
As within, so without.
Yeah, you when you're in a higher state of consciousness, you actually see and feel directly encroaching into your consciousness all this pain and misery everywhere, and it's just this amazing. It's like you're seeing something more powerfully than your eyes can see, and you see/feel it everywhere. And it's not some lesson like, oh, the Buddha says all life is suffering, so I believe it now. That's the First Noble Truth. No, this is a direct transmission you get from reality around you of direct perception of how things are. So see the difference? One is, just memorization like we learn in our public schools, learn some little maxim here. And then the other is a seeing, as a product of a different, higher level of consciousness. So
compassion.
Back to your... Yeah, it is. It's the source of this true compassion. There is no compassion, in my opinion, except for this kind of higher order compassion. All the rest of it is just
more selfish ego activity, and which leads to the Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq war theater, as they call it. But this is what, to get back to your question, the drones and whatnot. We have to basically not tell. We can't sit there and say, "I'm going to choose to live differently." It doesn't work. How many people listening to this show have tried to do that before, and it simply didn't work? Okay, what we need to do is say, I'm not going to try to change anything about myself. What I'm going to do is practice meditation or whatever my spiritual practice is, and do it properly. Do it. Not do it the way the church people in America do it, where they go to church, sleep through the sermon for 15 minutes, and then go home and watch the TV for the rest of the week. No, make your life a spiritual life where it's really centered around this cosmic fire that's everywhere, where you can contact these things. Or this field that's everywhere. And so what you want to do is don't try to change yourself. First, just do the practice and then see what happens, because you will change automatically without you sitting there trying to change yourself. It's the American thing to say, I'm going to make some changes in my life and take some control. And it never works. Okay, we always get worse. All right. So what we need to do is do the opposite, not do that and try to just find spiritual ecstasy that is us, within us, and live from there, and the changes will happen. Make yourself crooked and you will be straight, as we said yesterday.
That's a matter of, you're talking about getting your priorities right, because when they say, I'm going to make these changes, it's ego-driven. But when you say, connect inside, connect with your source, it's spirituality-driven. So
you spontaneously do. You don't live from the ego center, or whatever that means. You live from the spiritual center, and you can't help. I mean, everything works in that state. It's hard to explain, but everything just falls into place. And it's almost like telementation just is effortless. You don't even have to work at it. It just is your life. You just know everything will fall into place perfectly, and it does. And the Buddhists write about this. They, in the meditative states of consciousness, actual meditation, which is synonymous with spiritual ecstasy, to put it in the egotistical terminology, as we said earlier, things work out as they should. And it's just, it's sort of related to how Buddhists...
So why would I'm just trying to get it clear for the audience to say, because I understand what you're saying, but why? Why does that happen? Like you're saying, it just happens. And as a result of connecting to your inner core, your spiritual self, getting that priority going instead of the appearances or facades to impress or for the ego reasons or whatever, right? So the priorities are there. And then you're saying once you do that, it just happens. So, okay, why and what, is kind of bringing about the motivation. The motivation behind it becomes authentic, right? Because it's more in tune with the all.
The only way I know to answer this really interesting question, which, to tell you the truth, I don't think I've thought of before, so it's a wonderful question. But thinking off the cuff here, it has to be somehow centered around the idea that what we think of the human being as being is not what the human being actually is. And what we are is some sort of spiritual presence, which never was a physical being, which never existed in the physical, which never was meant to be in the physical, and it's a higher order orb of consciousness or something, for lack of better words. And this is the way we always actually were, something totally in harmony with the energies everywhere. And that's just what we have always been. And so the why is, well, I guess that's the only way I can think. Some of the questions that sometimes you'll ask me or people ask me, I'm just thinking about my meditation experiences. And I'm sort of giving you a little rundown of things that I witnessed in there, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to get it out, I guess, a little clearer. Why would this happen, and why would somebody want it to happen in their life? Because when you say this is throughout the Lightworker community, we are spiritual beings, experiencing a level of physicality for a timeline, and that is the disconnectedness with our true being. So to get through that and put it into reality is the why. Well, when we connect internally to our true essence, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So it's a matter of getting connected to that essence, and then maintaining that connectedness and that flow, right?
Yeah, people have to understand it's easier to exist as your real self, which is spiritual ecstasy. It's innerness. It's another way. I describe the whole universe as actually not being exterior. It's the universe is made up of innerness, to put it in a very metaphysical yet appropriate way. We have this idea that, I'm here and the tree's over there. Okay, so there's inner and outer. Okay, there is no outer. There never was and never will be. That's all a misperception. If say you're practicing a productive state of meditation right now. If you I'm looking at the leaves of a tree outside my window right now here in West Lafayette, Indiana, and looking into these leaves, in a state of meditation, you have this sense that you're not looking into the leaf. You're not looking at a leaf, you're looking into the leaf, and within the leaf, you just sense this energy field that's everywhere, in which is either connected to yourself or is yourself, or a mixture of the two. And we have to understand that this state of existing is actually easier to exist within, because it's us, than the egotistical state. When you start practicing meditation, it's hard to go back to at least fully the egotistical consciousness. It's you won't. You'll become changed. Your ego parts of it will break down. And I don't know if all of it will break down right away if you get into really productive meditation, but some parts of it will break down and just never really come back. And these are healthy changes. You won't be as uptight. You'll realize that things kind of just take care of themselves. You'll realize that all this you've spent your life worrying about this, that, and everything else, and and half the time, or say 95% of the time, you worried about stuff that never even came to be anyway. That's just an egotistical imagination trick. You start to understand these things, and your intelligence raises dramatically. So we have to understand that the difficult, awkward, painful, strange way to exist is the personality, the ego, which everybody's existing in now. And the easy state is letting all of that just simply fall away. And that's where we understand that the definition of consciousness is actually freedom. And it has implicitly built into its vibrations, is this emanation of pure freedom. Freedom is not, I can do what I want. Freedom is a feeling of ecstasy that we are, when I look into the leaf here, I am this spiritual field. I'm with it. I am it, and can feel it, and its feeling is my feeling. That's what freedom really is in its true sense. See, as I'm sure you and a lot of listeners know, when you do a lot of this meditation and you have transformative success with it, certain things just come into your consciousness, and it's sort of just realization. It's almost like a hypnagogic state when you're falling asleep at night. All this intelligence and brilliance just comes into your mind. You say, wow, where's that coming from? That's not what I'm used to in my ego state of consciousness from day to day life. And things that pop in your mind in the high mystical states are these different ways of looking at things. For example, that's why I became a theist, because I would see this energy field everywhere. Energy field is actually a very poor way to describe it, but I just use that again for descriptive purposes. But I just started to think that the word God would always pop into my mind. That is what God actually is, and is complete. And actually, that's in line with, ironically, with what's in parts of the Bible, not the Old Testament necessarily, but Damascus Road with St. Paul. It's somewhat similar, I would say. And that's one of the reasons I've started to say lately that Buddhism and Christianity are actually identical, because Christianity describes God as being an omnipresent light.
You're pushing one of my buttons with St. Paul.
No, I know.
I think he was a Roman spy, pretty much, implanted to corrupt the church for the Roman sake of changing it into what it is now, in its inception too. But that's somewhere else. But I don't want to go there.
Well, you could be right.
But anyway, I know all about spies. So anyway, you talk about telementation, letting go, and just living and feeling and experiencing the world around you, not worrying so much about everything. Well,
those things just happen. It's not like we decide them; they just happen. People should first don't try to change anything about yourself. Just do meditation, do the telementational work, or get Hubert Benoit's book. Then in the Psychology of Transformation, you just do it, and don't try to change anything. The changes just happen. But anyway, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So actually, what I was wondering is, can you give us some responses from people who've done it and examples, maybe with yourself or with some of the people who've done telementation and what's happened?
Oh yeah, this is just what surprised me, especially lately. Because I had my radio show last year, just, was on twice a month, but it moved to daily in January. And of course, I'm talking about telementation every other day. And a lot of people have bought the book, and I have just been surprised at how I get email after email saying, it works, I can't believe it. I figured it out. I get along with my daughter now. My migraine headaches went away. My father is feeling better. He's not as sick. All this, I just can't even, it is the answer to everything.